Hello, in this video we're gonna be talking about lower limb part 2, so let's not waste any of your time. Let's get right to it. Now in lower limb part 2, our primary focus is going to be on the foot itself and some of the auxiliary properties that it has. As you can see there, our first one is about arches. This would be a fairly short one. The last three are just images to kind of compare our anatomy to other organisms, and one you can see just how its differences, the similarities, and just how overall size and structure really kind of maintains, or I should say makes those differences. But when you think about the foot in the arches, one of the things that to recognize is that we have three arches in our foot, and as much as we wear shoes and in the process of buying shoes, we know that they really have to be made fit. I mean, you have to have a particular, if you've got a high arch, then you need a shoe that matches that, and vice versa. And of course, having poor arches or low arches is really counterproductive to the long-term health of the foot. But you can see the three arrows there, directional arrows, kind of showcasing those, and not only to show you the path of the arches, but also how they reflect the force of a step or of the walking process. Starting with the one on the diagram, the far right, the medial, you can see that it's going to be on the inner side, and that's the one that when you're buying a shoe, that when you're putting on, it's the one right inside that shoe on the inner half. And that's the largest and most visible one when you're looking in there, that really has to be solid. The one on the outside, the lateral, isn't nearly as important, but of course the one going across, the transverse, which is on the next screen, that's also super important. But you can also see the direction of the force as you step, or as you're walking or running. It pushes that force to the outside, which is very beneficial. And that way your foot doesn't take the full impact of each step. I mean, a person, as I mentioned in the last video, if you're what I call a stomper, almost Godzilla-like, where you're just stomping your foot down as you're moving, I mean, that's a long-term issues that could develop from just having the bone slammed into the ground each time for a long period of time, as opposed to that heel toe, soft and gentle rolling to help with that. And here the first two, and here's the third one, the transverse. Again, across the middle. This is one that from a military standpoint, this is one that they obviously, I don't know if it's still a major emphasis, but when I was your age, people going into the military had to worry about what we'd call flat feet or lack of that arch, and simply because of the amount of marching that's done back in those days, you just had to have a good healthy foot to be able to handle all of that, especially if a person is maybe a little bit larger, or as in with the military, repetitive amounts of marching could be an issue long term. All right, so for the last little bit here, this slide and the next three, which are just pictures, there'll be no more notes to take, but just talking about structural situations. Bipedalism is just the idea of being able to be upright and to be able to move on 2 feet, which is what the bi references, something like a horse would have quadpedalism, or if you're a gorilla, even though you have leg structures, you still move. You still move in a quadpedalism manner. But we're the only ones that do that stand upright and move on 2 feet. Although you can train animals to do so, but it may be cute, but it's not how what they're designed to do. A horse walking upright on 2 feet is cool to see, but long term that would be very detrimental to their hips. It's just not made to do that. Their power and force is designed to be pushing forward, not lifting up and whatever. But it's based on our structure, and especially our vertebrae plays a big part of that, and we'll see in one of the future pictures. All right, here's our first look at comparative anatomy. Here's the picture closest to me, obviously, is our foot compared to a chimpanzee's foot, and we know that primates have the ability to kind of grasp things. Well, I say that I'm not 100% certain that every primate does, but we know chimpanzees can, and a lot of that's beneficial because of their habitat. They're up in trees, grabbing onto the branch you're sitting on, you can actually hold on to. If you can imagine being up in a tree, you're climbing a tree maybe as a kid. If you could have actually held on as you were climbing with your feet, grabbed onto something and pushed yourself up, you'd have a better grip on that, and that would have made it a lot easier to do so. But you can see the structure is the same, as far as the sole and the phalanges and everything, but just that one little adaptation of having that bend and what we would call the big toe, being able to make it more into a thumb, which is really a reference to what it is. The other thing I want to bring up is on the far right over there, when you see the comparison between a chimpanzee's lower limbs, especially the pelvic girdle area, and ours, and you may think, okay, there's not much, what's the big deal? But just think how much more weight a chimpanzee's pelvic girdle can hold when it's that much larger. All that weight from above, which is just going to be a reference to strength and power and size. We know that primates are so much more stronger than we are just naturally. I mean, even someone that is a extreme power builder, weightlifter, still could not go toe to toe with a gorilla who just lives in a zoo and does nothing as far as strength. They're just so much more powerful, and having that size of pelvic girdle allows that. But you can also imagine that if we had that size of pelvic girdle and the muscles the size of the muscles that could go along with that, just think how much more powerful our lower bodies would be as far as running, as far as strength. And you would easily double, triple the amount of weight that people could lift, those that are associated with that, or athletic abilities, speed. We know that even gorillas are much faster than we are, even if they are 2 or 3 times heavier, and walk and move in the manner that they do. They're still faster than us. You would not want to try to outrun a gorilla. This next picture kind of emphasizes the muscle situation that I was referring to. Just look at the picture on the far left in the pink there. Just look at the attachment muscles, the difference in size between a chimpanzee and a human. A lot longer, a lot wider, so that just adds to the amount of force and power and torque that can be generated, and that's just the one connecting the upper half to the outside of the femur, not to mention what could be supported as it reached down below into the lower limb. And you can also see the difference in the vertebrae, that initial angling makes their just their body structure, their upright situation different than ours. And our last picture here, the point of reference here, just from a curiosity standpoint, is the pivot scenario when it comes to the two different skulls. I mean, just look at that massive jaw. I mean, when you want to think about power and strength in a situation, if your mandibles are that much larger than in other organisms, you're going to have associated muscles that go with that. The size of the muscles would also be extremely larger than ours. I mean, if as a human, if we bit into somebody's arm, we could, get a pretty good bite, but theoretically, especially if they put their hand on your forehead, you could pull away from a human bite. But try that with a dog with a long snout, or a chimpanzee with that size of a mandible, and it's just not going to happen. You're not going to pull your arm out of those situations, and simply just the power that's brought about because of a larger bone structure and the associated larger muscles. But the other thing to focus on is, and you can see it in the little blue triangle with the word pivot underneath, and then on the skull is flipped over, you can see where the foramens are that lead into the spinal cord. We benefit from our pivot spot being in the center, because then we can do this kind of stuff. We can nod our head forward and that kind of stuff. But if you can imagine as a chimpanzee or a gorilla with this huge weight in the front part of your skull compared to a more balanced like ours is, it would be, one could surmise or predict it would be difficult for gorillas to actually look up at the sky because of that. And a reference point to this that maybe it helped to understand is, think back to your childhood days when you were on a teeter-totter. And you've got that the pivot point right in the middle, to where as long as the people are with the two participants are close in size, you can easily go up and down on either side, and not a big issue. But just think if you took that pivot point and moved it halfway or even more closer to one end, then if a person is on the end that has the longer board and it's on the ground, the person on the top that's up in the air would have no chance to push that down. They would have to be exponentially larger than the other person to get that to happen. And matter of fact, if you had a teeter-totter that was like 80% towards one end, and say you had a person on the other end that's on the ground, and say 200-pound person, it actually would take quite a few people to pull that board that's raised, pull it down, and lift that person up. That would take a lot of strength to get that done. So we benefit greatly by having our pivot in the middle, but where we don't benefit is the fact that we have such a smaller mandible, and with smaller muscles associated with that, so we're not nearly the threat as far as a bite. But I guess in reality we shouldn't be biting each other, so maybe that doesn't matter. But anyway, that's the idea behind how structure affects function, and function is a representative of the structure that surrounds it. Well, that concludes this video over lower limb 2. It also concludes Chapter 8, the bones. So the next time we come together, we should be talking about muscles. We'll see you then.